Stephen Bedard here, and today I wanted to talk to you about disabilities, and specifically disabilities and the church. This is something that is extremely important to me on a number of levels. On one hand, I am a father of two children with developmental disabilities. They both have autism. They're both nonverbal, and I care about them. I care about their experience. I want the church to be a place where they are welcome and they can be embraced. On the other hand, I am also a pastor. I am a pastor of a church that tries to welcome people with disabilities, and I am hoping that we do that better and better each day. So I am thinking about this with both of those hats, my pastor hat and my dad hat. Disability and the church is so important to me that I actually changed my research for my thesis for my Doctor of Ministry degree after having gotten quite a bit of work done on my original thesis, which had sort of an apologetics theme to it. I ended up changing that to how churches can be inclusive and welcoming of people with disabilities, and I do not regret that change at all. I am thankful that I have the opportunity to do this research, but I want to ask you the question: why should your church care about people with disabilities? Why should your church seek to be disability friendly? You might look around at your congregation and say, well, we don't really have people with disabilities, so why should we even bother? Or you might be thinking, that's a lot of work with not necessarily a lot of payback on the end. It might not necessarily have the same outcome as if you invested in youth ministry or something else, some other kind of program. So why should you even bother with this? Well, that's what I want to talk to you about today. Why your church should seek to be disability friendly. And so one of them is because there are a lot of people with disabilities. In fact, the CDC did a study of this, and they found that 1 in 4 adults in the United States have some disability. It was exactly 26% was the number of people. So I want you to think about your congregation, and imagine a congregation of 100 adults. Would we be able to say that 26 of those adults in that congregation of 100 have a disability? Would we be able to recognize that? Now, I realize that there are some disabilities that are invisible, and that's part of the picture. That's part of what goes on. But do we really think we even come close to that? Part of the CDC study showed that 13.7% of people had mobility issues, specifically serious difficulty walking or climbing stairs. Would we say that there are almost 14 people in that church of 100 who are struggling in that way? Would we say that 10.8% have troubles with cognition? That's serious difficulty concentrating, remembering, or making decisions. Would there be almost 11 people in that congregation of 100? CDC found 6.8% of people had trouble with independent living. 5.9% of people had difficulty with hearing, either deafness or serious difficulty in hearing. 4.6% with vision problems, blindness or serious difficulty seeing, and 3.7% struggling with self-care. Would we see those numbers represented in the church? And I'll tell you, no. We do not see those numbers. They are not represented in the church. Certainly not any church that I've been a part of. And we at the church that I pastor really seek to be disability friendly. We have an intentional attitude towards welcoming and including people with disabilities. but those numbers are not represented in our church. So we have to realize that there are different kinds of disabilities. There are developmental disabilities, which include things like autism and Down syndrome, and there's many others as well. And yet that's not necessarily where we put our effort into. When we think about being disability friendly, many people will think about putting in an elevator or a ramp, and those things are great. Those are so important. Physical disabilities are very real, and we need to embrace people with physical disabilities, and I'm thankful for the push that has been on for churches to make sure that they are accessible to people with physical disabilities. Although I have encountered church leaders who have complained that these initiatives have been pushed on us by the government. But you know what? It should never have gotten to that point. We should have wanted to make these changes in our church buildings long before the government put in regulations. We should have been on the forefront of that. But in addition to physical and developmental disabilities, there's also people with mental illness. And we may not consider that disability, but that really is a part of the picture as well. Yes, there are some people who have some depression and some anxiety and are able to get through life without any real difficulty. Maybe the medication works for them and they're able to cope well. But there are others who really, really struggle. And how accessible are we to them? And these are some of the things we need to be thinking about. So one of the reasons why we should be disability friendly is the need is great. There are so many people out there, because we looked at what the numbers were and we see that those numbers are not represented in the church. Why is that? That's because for some people it's just too hard. It's so difficult to do that, to the idea of trying to make it work. We had a period of time when I was between churches. It was about 3 years that I wasn't pastoring. And I'll tell you, with our son with autism at home, there was a lot of times it was easier to stay home. So while I had been pastoring, very often our son stayed home with my wife while I was at church. But when I was out of ministry, very often I would send my wife to church and I would stay home with my son, because it was just easier that way. We didn't do that every Sunday, but a lot of times. And so you need to be aware that the idea of even making that effort to come to church is hard. And churches need to be proactive in terms of encouraging families with disabilities to even give it a try. But another thing that comes up is that a lot of people and families, parents, and people with disabilities feel like the church is not going to be welcoming to them. Now, that might shock you, but that is the way many people feel. And it is reality in a lot of places. I have talked personally with people who have been told, please do not bring your child to church. They are not welcome in our congregation, because they may make a sound, and that could disturb some people. Now, we're not talking about someone who's screaming for the entire worship service, okay? Everyone will go to that extreme, saying, of course we don't want that. Even the parents don't want that. But what happens when there's a child or an adult who will make some noise in the worship service? Can you imagine being told that your child is not welcome to come because of that? My children make sound. My son attends a church, and when he goes there, he makes sound during the worship service. And that congregation has to decide, are they willing to accept that? Is that something that they're willing to do in terms of welcoming him into their church family? So those are some of the things that people are struggling with. And so we have to make decisions. How are we going to respond? Are we going to seek to be friendly? Are we going to be proactive in that way? A lot of this has to do with our theology. Sometimes our theology is not very helpful when it comes to welcoming people with disabilities, and we have to think about some of the things that we say, some of the things that we just take for granted, and work through and look at what the Bible actually says about disabilities. And this is where some of the work that I'm doing comes in. So I'm not going to give you all the answers of how you can be disability friendly, but I want you to know that there is a need to do it. Not just because there are the families out there, but you know what? That's what the scriptures tell us as well. Throughout the Old and New Testament, we are continually told to reach out to those who are disenfranchised. Oftentimes in the Old Testament, it uses the symbols of widow and orphan, but it's not limiting it to a widow and orphan. You can't just say, well, if you have a spouse, you're not eligible for our compassion, or if you have parents still alive, we can't help you. That's not it. Those are often symbols for those who are in need. Sometimes they're referred to as the poor, the alien, and of course those literal definitions are extremely important. But we find it expanded throughout the Bible that there are people who are in need, who need God's people to be active, working with them, embracing them, loving them, and ministering to them and ministering with them. All of those things are extremely important. So I hope that you get this, that it is important for us to be disability friendly. And I hope in future videos to be able to share some more detailed information. You can find out some more information about this on Facebook. I have a Facebook page called How to Make Your Church Disability Friendly. So you can just do a search for that. And it's sort of based on the title of my book, How to Make Your Church Autism Friendly, which I also would encourage you to check out. Even though it's specifically about autism, I think that it will help you in terms of disabilities in general. And also on my website, I have an area that's specifically to do with disabilities and faith. And you can just go to stephenjbedard.com/disability. Thank you for watching this video. Please subscribe and visit me at my website. God bless you.